She walked into the police station scared, convinced someone was watching her. That same night, she vanished. No one believed her, until a burned-out patrol car revealed a file that should never have existed. The last known footage of Hannah Lawson was from a Tuesday afternoon that began like any other. It was 3:42 p.m. on a quiet October day in Crestwood, Colorado, a small mountain town of roughly 8,000 people, nestled against the edge of the San Isabel Forest. Most locals were prepping for the annual harvest fair, stringing paper lanterns outside storefronts and packing apple crates near the town square. But at precisely 3:42 p.m., a slim woman in jeans, a navy jacket, and dark-rimmed glasses walked through the front doors of the Crestwood Police Department. She wasn't carrying a bag. She wasn't bleeding or shaking or frantic. But the way she looked over her shoulder before stepping inside, that's what stood out later. Hannah Lawson was a second-grade teacher at Pinebrook Elementary. 32 years old, unmarried, lived alone in a rental home on Orchard Lane, 5 minutes from campus. According to those who knew her, she was kind, patient, overly prepared, and occasionally too cautious for her own good. She once kept a student after class just to make sure the girl's loose shoelace wouldn't trip her on the bus stairs. She sent thank you emails to custodians for wiping down her whiteboard. She was the type of person who set 2 alarms every morning and left her porch light on, even when she was home. That afternoon, she walked up to the main desk of the station and quietly asked to speak with someone. The front officer on duty, a junior clerk named Jared, noted that she didn't seem distressed, just tense. He marked her as concerned but calm. In the handwritten log, they showed her to interview room C. The officer assigned to speak with her was Sergeant Ellie Corwin, a 12-year veteran with a reputation for patience. According to internal records, the meeting lasted approximately 38 minutes. There is no full recording, a technical fault, the department would later claim, and Corwin's own summary was brief. Citizen reported concern over being followed. Described multiple sightings of the same vehicle parked near her residence and place of work. Feels watched. No threats received. No direct contact. Advised to document occurrences. Offered patrol drive-bys. Case opened under suspicious activity, pending further evidence. The case number was #1043-CLW-22. Hannah thanked Sergeant Corwin and left the station at 4:21 p.m. Security cameras show her stepping back onto Main Street, pausing slightly near the curb before walking west. She does not appear frightened. She checks her phone. A bus rumbles past behind her. Then she walks out of frame. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Pinebrook Elementary reported her absence to the district office. Hannah was known for her punctuality. She had never missed a day without advance notice in 7 years of teaching. Her classroom lights remained off. Her car was still parked in her driveway. A substitute was called in, and her neighbor, a retired librarian named Mrs. Gomez, said she hadn't seen Hannah leave the house that morning. By 2 p.m., her parents had been contacted. They lived in Colorado Springs, an hour and a half away. Her mother, Diane, called the police station directly, saying something was wrong. She called me Monday night, Diane said. Said she was thinking about getting a camera for her front porch. I asked why, and she said, because the same car was there again. Same time, same spot. She didn't sound panicked, just tired. I told her to go to the police if she was really worried. And she said she would. That's when the desk sergeant realized something was missing. There was no longer a file labeled #1043CLW-22. 22 in the open case system. Corwin swore she'd written the report. Jared remembered the visit. Security footage confirmed her entering and leaving. But the report itself? Gone. Officer Mark Olson, who'd been with the department for only 3 years, overheard the conversation. He was new enough to still believe in straight answers and old enough to know when something didn't smell right. That evening, after his shift, he quietly pulled the security footage himself. He watched Hannah enter, sit in interview room C, wait with folded hands. He watched her leave. He stared at the screen long after the video ended. There was something about her face, the way she kept glancing at the door, like she knew that once she filed that report, something would be set in motion, and she wouldn't be able to stop it. He reopened the system to check for backup entries, automatic logs, timestamps, review pings. Nothing, as if the report had never existed, and the woman who filed it had vanished with it. That night, Olson visited her house. The front door was locked, porch light on, curtains drawn. Her car sat in the driveway, untouched. Through the window, he could see a stack of graded papers on the coffee table and a cup of tea half drunk beside it. No signs of struggle, no disarray. He called her name through the door. No response. He called his supervisor. By 11:13 p.m., the official missing person report for Hannah Lawson was filed #1142 MIS. 22 this time digitally and with multiple copies. It wouldn't matter. Within 3 days, that case file would also disappear. And within a week, a burned-out police cruiser would be found off a dirt road outside of Crestwood. Inside it, a charred folder with a half-melted case number. 1043 CLW 22. The first 48 hours in a missing persons case are supposed to be the most critical. But in Crestwood, those hours ticked by with more questions than action and more silence than answers. By the morning of October 19th, word had spread that Hannah Lawson hadn't returned home. Parents at Pinebrook Elementary began whispering at drop-off, wondering aloud why her classroom blinds stayed drawn. Her students were sent to the art room for the day, and the principal issued a brief statement. Ms. Lawson is currently out on an unscheduled leave of absence. We will keep families updated. No one used the word missing. Not yet. At the station, Officer Mark Olson pushed harder. He had filed the official report the night before and now stood in front of Lieutenant Rayner's desk with a grim expression. Her case file, the one from Tuesday? It was gone, Olson said. Deleted, not misplaced. Rayner, a barrel-chested man with a clipped beard and reputation for brushing off small-town paranoia, barely looked up from his monitor. Maybe it wasn't submitted properly. I checked the auto logs, Olson replied. There's no trace of it. Not even metadata. No one can delete a report without admin-level clearance. Not even Corwin. Rayner finally glanced at him. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. But we have a woman who filed a stalking complaint and now she's gone. The case file's gone. And no one's asking questions. Rayner exhaled through his nose. We're stretched thin. You want to run point on it? Fine. But don't stir panic over a teacher who might have just taken off for a couple days. Olson took the assignment, and Hannah's parents kept calling. Diane and Greg Lawson arrived in Crestwood later that morning. They drove straight to their daughter's house and were met by Olson outside. Diane went pale the moment she saw the porch light still glowing in daylight. She always turns it off by 8 a.m., she whispered. Inside, the scene was exactly the same. No signs of violence. No broken locks. No overturned furniture. but her cell phone was still charging beside her bed. Her purse sat untouched on the kitchen table. Her calendar was open to that week, with a note scrawled for Tuesday, "Go to station, bring plate #." Greg stared at that line for nearly a minute. "What plate?" he asked. There was no follow-up note. No photo. No paper scrap. Olson photographed the calendar and added it to the case log. Meanwhile, Sergeant Ellie Corwin was growing uneasy. She was the one who'd met with Hannah just 2 days earlier. The interaction had seemed normal enough at the time. Hannah had been articulate, calm, and precise. She even apologized for possibly overreacting. But Corwin remembered something now, something that didn't sit right. At the end of their conversation, Hannah had leaned forward and lowered her voice. "I know how this sounds," she said, "and I'm not trying to waste your time. But I think he's watching me because I found out something I wasn't supposed to." Corwin had paused. "Who's he?" Hannah hesitated. "I don't know yet, but I think he works for the county. Or maybe with the department." Corwin had written that off at the time as anxiety-fueled paranoia. She hadn't included the quote in her report. But now the report itself was missing. And Hannah was too. That evening, a local reporter caught wind of the situation. Kendra Ruiz, a sharp-featured woman in her early 30s, ran a small online blog that covered Crestwood and surrounding towns. She had a reputation for digging deeper than most. She left Olson a voicemail at 7:13 p.m., got a tip about a missing teacher, and something about a deleted police report. "Want to comment before I publish?" Olson didn't call back. Not yet. But the next morning, the headline ran anyway. "Teacher missing after reporting stalker records disappear from police database." It was sensational, unconfirmed. And suddenly, everyone in town was asking questions. At the station, Olson was reprimanded for leaking details. He hadn't, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. On Friday morning, exactly 48 hours after Hannah's disappearance, something shifted. A teenage boy named Tyler McConnell came forward. He was 15, lanky and jittery, and walked into the station alone. He asked to speak to an officer about Ms. Lawson. Olson met with him. "She was my teacher in 2nd grade," Tyler said. "She's the reason I even finished school that year. I've kept in touch with her sometimes. Through email." Olson nodded, encouraging him. "I emailed her last week just asking if I could use her as a reference for a volunteer thing. She said yes. But then she asked me something weird." "Weird how?" "She asked if I ever remembered seeing a guy outside the school years ago. A man with a camera. She said it was probably nothing, but that she thought maybe something had been going on back then." Olson's stomach turned. "Did she say why?" "She said she was looking into something from a while back. Something about a kid whose mom died in 2020. She didn't say names. Just, she said it was bothering her." Olson jotted it down. Now there was a possible connection between Hannah and a past case. One the department had already closed. But the final straw came late that night. Just before midnight, Officer Corwin, unable to sleep, decided to review her body cam footage from Tuesday. She logged in, scrolled to the correct date, opened the file labeled Room C, October 17th, 22 Lawson. The screen blinked. Error. File not found. She checked the backup directory. Nothing. She called dispatch and asked for Jared, the clerk who had checked Hannah in. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, weird question," she said. "Do you remember if the system was down Tuesday afternoon?" "No," he replied, pretty sure it was fine. Okay, she said, because every trace of that interview is gone. Jared was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're not the first person to say that this week." Corwin felt the hairs on her neck rise. She looked at the empty folder again. And this time it didn't feel like a glitch. Felt like a warning. By Saturday morning, Crestwood no longer felt like a quiet town tucked in the hills. It felt like something was cracking under the surface. And Officer Mark Olson wasn't sleeping. He sat at his kitchen table with the same surveillance screenshots open on his laptop. Hannah walking into the station. Hannah walking out. She looked over her shoulder again. Olson zoomed in on that single frame and stared at her expression. Not fear. Not panic. Conviction. She'd come with something. Maybe not enough to hand over, but enough to warrant a report. Enough to get her hurt. Olson returned to the station and dug into archived camera footage from the week leading up to Hannah's visit. He focused on the street outside her house, Orchard Lane, a dead-end road lined with pine trees and pale blue porches. There, at 4:13 p.m. on October 14th, a dark sedan pulled up across from her driveway. No one exited. The vehicle sat for 15 minutes, then pulled away. Olson fast-forwarded. October 15th. Same car, same spot, this time for nearly 30 minutes. October 16th, gone. October 17th. The day Hannah filed her report. Car not seen, but something else was. At 4:25 p.m., 4 minutes after Hannah left the police station, the same sedan appeared on Main Street, passing the department's side entrance. It slowed slightly, turned down Maple Street, disappeared from frame. Olson ran the plates, or tried to. The car had no plates, just a dark blue body, tinted windows, and a small sticker in the back windshield, a faded logo for Eagle Ridge Security, a local private firm that had closed 2 years earlier. He logged the time code, made a copy of the footage, and decided not to mention it to anyone yet. Not until he was sure who was listening. Meanwhile, Hannah's parents had moved into her house temporarily. Her mother refused to leave until she had answers. Diane spent hours combing through Hannah's things, sometimes just standing in the doorway of her bedroom. "It doesn't feel like she's gone," she told Olson. "It feels like she's been paused, like she's gonna walk back in and finish her sentence." It was Diane who found the notebook. Tucked beneath a stack of curriculum guides in Hannah's home office, it was a simple spiral pad with neat handwriting inside. The first page was a lesson plan. The second, a list of groceries. But on the third page, in faint pencil, was something different. Blue car again, parked for 20 minutes. Engine off. No plate. Same scratch on back bumper. Below it, saw him at the school, near gym doors. Pretended to be on phone. And on the next page, file the report. Don't say too much yet. Wait to see if anyone reacts. There were no names, but it was clear Hannah had been documenting something, and that she'd been cautious. Olson flipped through the remaining pages. Near the back, there was a scrawled note in red ink. "Ask about File 097B Drew's case." He circled it. It was the first real lead. Olson returned to the station and pulled up the internal case log, filtering for closed reports from 2020 involving children or school staff. It took a while. Some records were fragmented, others misfiled. But eventually he found it. Case 097B, Andrea Kelman, mother of Drew Kelman, age 9. Domestic disturbance turned homicide. The boy had called 911 after a loud noise and read on the floor. When officers arrived, the mother was dead. The boyfriend, a man named Richard Bell, was gone. Case closed 2 months later. Cause: domestic violence. Suspect: deceased died in a single-car accident during police pursuit. File signed off by Detective Scott Blake. Olson stared at the screen. Scott Blake was still with the department, still on active duty, and had once worked part-time with Eagle Ridge Security. The same logo Hannah had spotted on the car outside her house. He printed the case file and brought it home. The deeper he read, the more uneasy he became. Nowhere in the report did it mention any connection between Hannah Lawson and the Kelman case. But her note said otherwise. Ask about Drew. Olson called the district office. Drew had transferred schools after his mother's death. But in 2019, he had been in second grade in Hannah's class. There it was. The thread. She'd taught the boy, known the family, maybe seen something, and maybe she'd recognized something or someone that the police hadn't. Olson needed answers, but he also knew something else. If someone had gone through this much trouble to erase her report, they wouldn't stop just because another officer picked up the file. So he went to someone he trusted, Sergeant Ellie Corwin. She met him in the break room around 10:30 p.m., after the rest of the building had emptied out. He laid out the notebook, the street cam stills, the connections to the Kelman case, and the missing file. Scott Blake signed off on it, he said, and Hannah wrote his name in her planner 2 weeks ago, circled twice. Corwin didn't speak at first. Then she said, "You know what Blake said to me the night after Hannah went missing?" "What?" He said, "We can't chase every ghost story." Olson looked at her. "Is that what this is?" Corwin shook her head slowly. "No, it's a cover-up." At 4:12 a.m., a call came into the Crestwood Dispatch Center. A local hunter had found a burned-out vehicle off mile marker 41, an unpaved stretch of road near the edge of the county line. It had been stripped, torched, left to rot. But the VIN came back clean. Crestwood Police Department. Marked vehicle number 47. Supposedly out of commission since 2021. Inside, they found a melted file folder fused to the passenger seat. One paper survived partially, a scorched fragment, but the case number at the top was still visible. 1043 CLW 22. Hannah's report. It hadn't vanished. It had been taken, and someone had tried to destroy it. Olson stared at the ruins through the glare of floodlights and smoke. Someone inside the department had buried her complaint in flame, but not deep enough. And now he was going to dig the rest of it out. The discovery of the burned cruiser hit the department like a cold slap to the face. Not just because it confirmed someone was hiding evidence, but because it proved they were willing to destroy department property to do it. Lieutenant Rayner ordered a formal internal review, but behind closed doors, no one really believed it would go anywhere. Everyone was too careful now, too quiet. Officers who used to chat in the break room now kept their heads down and their folders closer. And Olson? He doubled down. First, he requested access to the vehicle log records, specifically those connected to car number 47. Technically, that cruiser had been retired the previous year due to electrical issues. But the maintenance report was vague. Just a one-sentence note: vehicle flagged for disposal, no further use. There was no confirmation of it ever being stripped, stored, or sold. But someone had taken it, driven it, and used it to transport Hannah's missing case file before setting it on fire. There were no fingerprints in the car. Too much damage. But one thing survived. A bent metal clip, charred and twisted, with a bit of plastic still fused inside. It was a flash drive, and the lab tech managed to recover one file, a low-resolution scan of a handwritten document. Olson squinted at the screen. It was a copy of Hannah's original report, barely legible, but enough to make out the title, Suspicious Activity Report, filed by Hannah Lawson. Date, October 17th. Below that, a partial line. Subject has been parked outside my residence multiple times this month. Black or dark blue sedan. No visible plates. One instance observed near school grounds. Suspect may be linked to prior incident involving former student. Then it cut off. Whoever had scanned the report hadn't saved the rest. But the connection was undeniable. Hannah had linked her stalking to the Kelman case, and to someone who'd been watching both her home and her school. Meanwhile, her parents were still staying at her house. Her mother hadn't unpacked a single bag. One afternoon, while Olson stopped by to share the flash drive discovery, Diane asked him a question that froze him mid-sentence. "Have you checked the attic?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" She always said if she had something to hide, something important, something someone might take, she'd put it where she was too scared to look herself. Olson went up there that night with a flashlight and a crowbar. The attic was low and dusty, filled with old textbooks, holiday decorations, and plastic bins of childhood memorabilia. He found it tucked behind a beam, a locked metal box. Inside, a stack of printed emails, a notebook, and 3 photos. The emails were between Hannah and an address labeled Anonymous Student 22. The earliest message was from August. "Ms. Lawson, I don't know if you remember me, but I was in your class a few years ago. My name is Drew. My mom died a while back. I didn't want to talk about it then, but now I think I remember something I shouldn't have seen. If I'm wrong, ignore this. But if I'm not, please help." The later messages were more detailed. He described a man who used to visit their house late at night, someone who argued with his mom but was never listed in the police report. He said he'd once heard his mom whispering on the phone about a badge and a lie. He mentioned a scar under the man's chin, and that once he saw the man walking past his school 2 years later. Olson's pulse picked up. He called Corwin, told her to meet him at the station. They pulled up Richard Bell's profile, the boyfriend blamed for the mother's murder. No scar under his chin. But when they pulled up Detective Scott Blake's ID photo, there it was, a thin white scar, barely noticeable, just beneath the jawline. "Jesus," Corwin whispered. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Olson said. Blake had investigated the Kelman case, and now all signs pointed to the fact that he might have been involved in it. Or worse, that he'd pinned it on a dead man to bury his own tracks. But if Hannah had figured that out or even suspected it, then everything made sense. Why she was scared. Why she didn't name names in the report. Why she left clues instead of confessions. She was afraid the system wouldn't protect her, that someone inside it was already watching. And she'd been right, because now someone had broken into her house. It happened the following night. No forced entry, but drawers were open, boxes tipped over. The metal lockbox in the attic? Gone. Her parents had gone to a motel for the evening on Olson's advice to give investigators uninterrupted access to the house. But someone else had gotten there first. The photos? The emails? The notes? All missing. All except one thing. Sticky note. Stuck to the inside of Hannah's bedroom door. For words in red ink. "You're looking too hard." Olson and Corwin didn't sleep. They pulled surveillance from every nearby home, but whoever had done it had moved in the blind spots. No plates, no footage, but the message was clear. Someone knew they were getting close, and they wanted them to stop. That same morning, another call came in, this time from a woman named Renee Hartley, a school counselor at Pinebrook. She said she'd remembered something odd about Hannah's last week at work. She came to see me on Wednesday, Renee said. Said she was worried about Drew. Asked if he'd been withdrawn or quiet lately. I told her he transferred out 2 years ago. What did she say? She just said, "I think his story's not finished yet." Then she left. Olson felt the back of his neck prickle. He asked if Renee knew where Drew had moved. She gave him the name of the new school district, and Olson made the call. Drew Kelman, now 11, was enrolled in a school 2 counties over. He lived with a foster family. No known relatives had stepped forward after his mother's death. When Olson drove to meet them, he wasn't sure what to expect. But what he found was a boy who still had nightmares, and who recognized the face Olson showed him without hesitation. "Yes," Drew said quietly. "That's him. The man who came to the house. The one my mom was afraid of. It was Blake." Olson thanked the boy, told the foster parents he'd be in touch. Then he got back in his car. Sat for a long minute with the engine running. Scott Blake was still on duty, still carrying a badge, still free. But now there was proof. And the cruiser was still smoking when Olson returned to the scene. It had been towed to an evidence lot behind the county garage, but the smell of melted rubber and scorched vinyl still clung to its shell like a warning. The fire hadn't just destroyed the vehicle. It had tried to erase something, and it hadn't quite succeeded. A forensic team was already combing through the remains. Olson watched through the fence as they cataloged pieces of the wreck: a partially melted radio, a warped flashlight casing, and fragments of what had once been a standard-issue evidence box. The metal file clip they'd recovered earlier now sat in a sealed bag. Next to it, a heat-damaged key fob with the Crestwood PD logo. Car number 47. The cruiser Hannah's report had supposedly never entered. And yet here it was burned to ash, with her case number among the ruins. The techs found something else, too. A page mostly intact, though smoke-stained and curled. It was the second page of her report. Still legible, still damning. "I believe the man watching me may be linked to a former case involving a student named Drew Kelman. I taught him in 2019. His mother died in what was ruled a domestic incident. But I remember seeing someone else at the school weeks before that. A man in plain clothes, standing by the fence during recess. I thought he was just a visitor. But when I saw him again outside my house last week, I knew something was wrong. He had a scar under his chin." Olson reread it 3 times. This wasn't just about being watched. Hannah had connected her stalker to a murder, and she'd named the scar the one on Blake's jaw. She hadn't written his name, but it didn't matter. The implication was loud enough. And now the paper that proved it had almost been turned to ash. Almost. Corwin met Olson later that night in the station's back parking lot. They sat in his car with the windows rolled up, voices low. "You sure about this?" she asked, holding the sealed bag. "Positive," Olson replied. "He burned a cruiser to hide a report. That's not fear. That's guilt." Corwin exhaled slowly. "You know what happens if we go after this the wrong way?" "I do. That's why we're not going through Rayner." "You want the state?" "No," he said. "I want someone who doesn't owe this town anything." The next morning, they made the call to the State Bureau of Investigation. It took 4 hours to get someone assigned. But at 3:06 p.m., Special Agent Danielle Ames walked into the Crestwood station. Tall, late 40s, minimal makeup, eyes that scanned like they were taking inventory of everything before you opened your mouth. She was briefed in a side office. Olson laid out the file fragments, the photos, the redacted Kelman case, and the link to Blake. Corwin added the incident with the body cam footage and the attic break-in. Ames didn't interrupt once. When they were done, she sat back, folded her hands, and said, "You were right to call." Then she asked a single question. "Where is Detective Blake now?" Olson didn't hesitate. "Still on active duty. He's been out on patrol this week." Ames nodded. "Then we keep him there. For now." But that night, Blake didn't check in. His patrol route, normally logged via GPS, ended abruptly around 8:22 p.m. His cruiser was found abandoned 2 hours later in a municipal lot outside the old courthouse. The keys were gone. So was his sidearm. His house was dark, locked, no signs of struggle, no signs of anything, really, as if he'd simply vanished. But Olson didn't buy it. Blake wasn't running. He was hiding. The next break came from an unlikely source, a city maintenance worker named Troy Mendez. He'd been assigned to clean out an old municipal shed behind the Crestwood Reservoir. The building hadn't been used in years, boarded windows, half-collapsed roof, lots of raccoon droppings. But Troy noticed something strange. A discarded food wrapper, still fresh, trail mix, the brand Hannah always kept in her desk drawer at school. Troy called it in, and by midnight, the shed was surrounded. Olson and Agent Ames arrived together. No lights, no heat, but someone had been there. A torn blanket, an empty water bottle, and in the far corner, partially buried beneath a rotting tarp, a boot print. Small, narrow, not Blake's. Hannah's? The lab couldn't confirm yet, but it was enough to set fire to hope. She had been here, maybe still alive, maybe nearby. The search radius widened. Drones, dogs, volunteers. Every lead followed, every path combed. But there was one other thing inside the shed. A folded piece of printer paper, tucked under a brick. Olson opened it slowly, heart pounding. It was a screenshot of a Google Maps satellite image. Zoomed in on a wooded area near a gas station on Route 88. Circled in red. And underneath it, scribbled in pen, "If you're reading this, he's still out there." No signature. No fingerprints. But the implication was clear. This wasn't over. And Hannah had tried to leave a trail. That night, as rain fell over Crestwood and the scent of burned rubber still lingered in the station's evidence room, Olson looked again at her last words in the report. "I don't want to be right, but if I am, someone needs to know before it's too late." It wasn't too late. Not yet. But the clock was ticking. And somewhere, out in the dark, the man with the badge and the scar was watching. And waiting. The problem with uncovering rot inside a system is that you never know how deep it goes. And by Sunday night, Officer Mark Olson was starting to feel like the floor beneath him wasn't just cracking, it was rigged to collapse. Blake was still missing. Agent Danielle Ames had officially listed him as a fugitive under investigation for destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice. But internally, everyone was thinking the same thing. If he burned a cruiser to hide Hannah's report, what else had he buried? And who had helped him? Because one thing was now certain: he hadn't done this alone. At 2:03 a.m., Olson got a call from a private number. He didn't answer. It rang again, same number. He picked up. Silence at first. Then a voice. Male, flat, deliberate. "You need to stop. You're chasing shadows with teeth." Click. No trace. The number was spoofed. But the message was real. By morning, Corwin had more. She dug into the Kelman case again, not just the official reports, but the supplemental notes. Some were signed by Blake. Others were anonymous. Just initialed RM. Rainer Monroe, the chief of police. Olson stared at the screen as the document loaded. Why would the chief be listed as a contributor on a domestic homicide file? Corwin shrugged. That's what I'm wondering too. They scanned the report line by line. Then they saw it a detail that hadn't stood out before. No body cam footage submitted. Primary unit camera flagged as non-operational. The same excuse used for Hannah's missing interview footage. The same pattern. No footage. No paper trail. No accountability. And suddenly it clicked. This wasn't just Blake. This was bigger. They brought it to Ames. She didn't blink. I've seen this before, she said. Small-town departments. Old friends. Favors that turn into secrets. Secrets that turn into leverage. She pulled up her laptop and opened a sealed folder marked Quiet Oak Initiative Internal Misconduct Watch List. Inside, a spreadsheet of law enforcement officials flagged for potential coordinated suppression across several counties. 2 names stood out immediately: Scott Blake, Rainer Monroe, and below them a third, Richard Bell, deceased, except there was an asterisk next to his name. Olson leaned closer. What's that mean? Ames clicked the file. It opened a scanned copy of a coroner's report from 2020, the car accident that supposedly killed Richard Bell. Except the report wasn't signed, and the attached photos didn't show a clear body. No autopsy was filed. Just a generic statement. Cause of death assumed based on crash severity. Assumed, not confirmed. Ames looked up at them. You think what I'm thinking? She asked. That Bell didn't die, Olson said quietly. That Blake used his name, maybe even his vehicle, and that whoever killed Drew's mother, it wasn't a boyfriend running from the law. It was a cop hiding behind the badge. Corwin swallowed hard. And now Hannah's missing because she figured it out. At 6:17 p.m., a break. A call came in from a construction worker clearing brush along the foothills west of town. He reported finding a makeshift shelter near a dry creek bed tarp, sleeping bag, empty cans, and one other thing, a photo, crumpled, dirty, half buried in the mud. It showed a young woman, dark hair, navy jacket, glasses. Hannah. It wasn't a selfie. It had been taken from a distance, likely by a zoom lens. In the background, barely visible, was the Crestwood police station. A surveillance photo. Someone had been watching her from the moment she stepped inside to file her report. And they'd followed her home. The shelter was abandoned. But nearby they found something else. A shallow hole hidden beneath a pile of branches. Inside, a box contained a burner phone, 2 empty shell casings, and a police badge. The number was scratched off, but the badge design was familiar. Crestwood issue. Model discontinued 3 years ago. The timing matched the retirement of Blake's old cruiser and the fire that tried to erase Hannah's report. Everything was connecting now. The fire, the stalking, the Kelman case, and one more name was about to surface. Ames sent the burner phone to the digital lab for decryption. When the contents came back, there were only 3 things stored on the device. A list of 3 GPS locations, all coordinates in the forest surrounding Crestwood. A short audio file. A photo album with just 1 image. Olson opened the image first. It was dark, blurry, but it showed a woman in what looked like a basement sitting upright, wrapped in a thermal blanket. She was blinking into the camera, dazed. Hannah, still alive, still fighting. The timestamp was from 6 days ago, the night after she vanished. The hope that surged in Olsen's chest was immediate and sharp. They had proof, and a trail. Now they needed to follow it. The audio file was only 12 seconds long. Muffled breathing, a woman's voice shaking, raspy, urgent. If you find this, I was right. He's not Bell. He's Blake. He's using Bell's name. He made me write something. I think he's taking me east. Click. Silence. The coordinates were immediately mapped. All three formed a rough triangle around an old Ranger service road no longer in use that had once led to a decommissioned Firewatch tower. Ames organized a tactical search team. Olsen and Corwin rode in the lead vehicle, and as they neared the final location, the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting everything in orange shadow. The road was narrow, rough, but the tower was still there, weather-beaten, partially collapsed, and quiet, too quiet. They moved in on foot, guns drawn, flashlights ready, no voices, no movement. But at the base of the tower, half concealed under a pile of leaves, they found a trapdoor. Padlocked, recently disturbed. Olsen's pulse hammered in his ears. Corwin looked at him. Ready. He nodded. They cut the lock, swung the door open, and descended into the dark. The air beneath the tower was heavy with damp soil and silence. The stairs creaked under each footfall, the wood spongy with moisture and rot. Officer Olsen went first, flashlight sweeping from corner to corner, jaw clenched, hand near his holster. Corwin followed closely, while Agent Ames remained above, coordinating backup. The space beneath the tower was barely more than a cellar walls of cracked concrete, a rusted cot in the corner, a table smeared with dust. At first glance, it looked empty, but in the back corner, beneath a folded tarp, they found a duffel bag, and beside it an empty 4-bag still attached to a piece of surgical tape. Olsen dropped to one knee. Someone was here, he muttered. Recently, Corwin added. Very recently, but not now. There was no sign of Hannah, just the ghosts of where she might have been. The duffel contained food wrappers, gauze, a map with 3 trails marked in red, and something wrapped in a t-shirt, a hard drive, portable, dusty, cold to the touch. Olsen turned it over slowly, reading the etched sticker on the bottom. Property of Crestwood PD Evidence Room. Confidential. What the hell is this doing here? Corwin asked. I think we just found the last thing Blake didn't want us to see, Olsen said quietly. Back at the station, Ames secured the drive in a lab. Decryption took hours, but once the files opened, they were devastating. Surveillance logs, photos, notes, hundreds of documents, none of which had ever been entered into Crestwood's official evidence database. Each was dated, tagged, and archived under false case numbers. But the names? They were real. Andrea Kelman, Drew Kelman, Richard Bell, and Hannah Lawson. One folder stood out. Red Bird. Inside a single video file. It opened with the interior of a car. Dash-mounted camera. Low light. Blake's voice. He's talking to someone off camera. You're going to keep your mouth shut. You're going to sign this statement. And then you're going to disappear for a few days. Understand? The camera tilts slightly. We see Hannah's face. Bruised. Shaking. Eyes full of defiance. She doesn't respond. Blake leans closer. If you go to the state police, I'll make sure they find your car in a lake before sunrise. Click. The file ends. Olson's hands curled into fists. She was alive. He had her. And he was moving her. Corwin stared at the screen, breath shallow. But where is she now? Ames clicked open the metadata tab. The footage had been recorded 5 days earlier at 1:12 a.m. Location tag, off-grid. But the trail from the portable drive suggested it had been connected to an internet source just once yesterday morning. Brief, seconds long, but enough for Hannah to upload one last thing. A document titled IF_for disappear. Olson opened it. It was a scanned notebook page, her handwriting unmistakable. I was right. Blake isn't who he says he is. He used the name Richard Bell to bury the Kelman case and to erase himself. I found matching purchase records, surveillance contracts, and badge numbers tied to both names. I told no one at first. I didn't trust the department, but I kept notes. And if you're reading this, then I didn't make it. But someone has to. Keep looking near the service road off Route 88. The last place he left me had a red rope tied to the trees. A red rope. A location. Another clue. They moved fast. Route 88 ran along the southeast side of Crestwood. A forgotten stretch of asphalt that led into the woods, not a main road. Not maintained. The kind of place you'd only find if you were trying to disappear. Ames deployed a team of 5 agents. Olson and Corwin rode at the front. They reached the tree line just after 4 p.m. Fog had begun to settle between the hills. Rain threatened the horizon, and their 20 yards into the forest fluttered something crimson. A rope, tied around 2 trees like a marker. They followed it, past another rope, then another, like breadcrumbs, leading them to a narrow drop in the terrain. And below, a shack. It was small, old, half collapsed from one side but recently disturbed. Inside, a mattress, chains, a tray with dried food, torn cloth, but most important of all, a shoe. A woman's sneaker, pink, muddy, the size tag still intact. Size 7.5, Hannah's size. Olson picked it up with shaking hands. And then, from the corner, a sound. Not loud, but real. A breath. A cough. Corwin raised her flashlight. Behind a loose panel in the wall, beneath a false cabinet, something moved. Then a whisper. Don't shoot. Olson dropped to his knees. Hannah. And then she was there. Pale. Filthy. Eyes red-rimmed but alive. She collapsed into him, shaking. You found me, she said. You actually found me. Medical crews were called. She was rushed to a mobile triage unit, dehydrated but conscious, weak but speaking. Ames stood by as they loaded her into the ambulance, watching the woods behind them. Blake was still out there, but Hannah had survived him, barely, and the drive she'd left behind was enough to open a dozen new investigations. Before the doors closed, Olson leaned inside the ambulance. She looked up at him, barely able to smile. I wrote everything down, she whispered, even when I thought it wouldn't matter. He nodded. It matters now. Then the doors shut, and the ambulance rolled into the night, leaving behind the trees, and the man still hiding in their shadows. Hannah Lawson survived 7 days in that shack. She'd been drugged, moved, gagged, but never silenced. Every moment she was conscious, she studied her surroundings. Every scrap of red rope, every creak in the floorboards, every direction the wind came through the slats she remembered. And when she wasn't being watched, she wrote. She scrawled notes into her notebook. She etched numbers into the underside of furniture. She hid pieces of gauze with initials under the bed. She didn't just survive, she left a map, a record, a message. "I don't expect to be rescued," she wrote on one torn sheet of paper. "But if someone finds this, please don't let the truth die with me." But she had been rescued, and now the truth, the whole of it, was clawing its way into daylight. Within 48 hours of her recovery, the SBI issued a warrant for Detective Scott Blake. His photo was released to the media, and with it, another name, Richard Bell, confirmed via forensic evidence and witness testimony as a false identity used by Blake in at least 2 prior cases. One of them, the Kelman case. It had been reopened, but that wasn't all. The hard drive Hannah had hidden led investigators further into years of concealed evidence suppression, false statements, planted drugs, and coerced confessions. At least 4 convictions tied to Blake's investigative work were overturned within a week, and more names began to surface. Rainer Monroe was placed on leave pending a full inquiry. 2 retired officers, one of whom now lived in Arizona, were subpoenaed for questioning, and a full audit of Crestwood PD's internal systems began. Agent Danielle Ames, now heading the independent task force, called it one of the most severe integrity collapses she'd seen in a rural department. But she didn't call it a failure, because Hannah hadn't let it fail. She'd told the truth when it mattered most, and when no one believed her, she documented everything. In the days that followed, Olson visited her often, not as a cop, but as someone who had once dismissed her instincts. He brought flowers once, awkwardly, and she gave a soft laugh when she saw the card. "You were right. I was late. Thank you for waiting." She smiled weakly. "You came when it mattered." As her body healed, so did her spirit. She testified from her hospital bed at first, then in a closed hearing in the county courthouse. She recounted what happened after she filed her report. How Blake had appeared at her home that night in uniform, calm and polite. He'd said the department needed her to clarify a few things. She trusted him for a moment. He drove her himself, not to the station, but to a garage on the edge of town. Drugged her water. She woke in the shack. And for 7 days, she endured the isolation, the threats, and the manipulation. He'd wanted her to record a video, a confession, a lie, to say she made it all up. She refused. And that's when he said, "You think you're the first to threaten me? The last?" There's a lot of woods between truth and memory. But he was wrong. She didn't vanish. Her memory didn't die in the woods. She came back, and her truth broke him. Scott Blake was captured 10 days later, hiding in an abandoned property owned by a distant cousin in western Nevada. He'd shaved his head, burned his uniforms, tried to erase himself, but the scar under his chin gave him away. It always had. When arrested, he refused to speak. But it didn't matter. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial began 6 months later. Hannah took the stand. So did Drew Kelman. So did Olson. And in a packed courtroom where silence hung like judgment, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Blake was sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the trial, Hannah left Crestwood. Not out of fear, but to start over. She moved to the coast. Took a teaching job again, this time at a small charter school where no one knew her name or story. At least not at first. But one day, she was asked to speak at a local panel about resilience in education. She hesitated, then said yes. And that night, in a small auditorium with plastic folding chairs and humming fluorescent lights, she told her story for the first time as a survivor. Not as a victim, not as a witness, but as someone who refused to disappear. Olson stayed on the force another year. Then he retired quietly. He never talked much about what happened. But once a year, he visits the base of the Firewatch Tower. There's a plaque there now, mounted to the stone. It reads, "For the truth that wouldn't burn, for the voice that couldn't be silenced, for Hannah Lawson who survived." And if you ask people in Crestwood what changed after Hannah, they'll say the police are different now. More cautious, more transparent. They'll say it took a woman nearly dying for the town to open its eyes. But they'll also say something else, that in the woods, truth echoes longer than silence. And even in darkness, someone is always listening.